Hello everyone, Professor Wolf here. I'm making this video for students in my Introduction to Philosophy class at College DuPage in fall 2025. We're currently wrapping up a unit on ethics. You have an in-class assignment on ethics to complete. There are 4 questions on the assignment. We've covered some of them, not all of them in class. These videos are meant to review and supplement what we covered in class. Yesterday I recorded and uploaded videos on questions 1 and 4. Today I will make videos, upload videos on questions 2 and 3. In this video I will address question number 2. Let's read the question. Here goes. What are the epistemological and metaphysical arguments against moral objectivism? Do you find them persuasive? Why or why not? Okay, first, a few words about the terms epistemological and metaphysical. We've touched on these briefly in class. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy often said to deal with knowledge, and that is true, but not just knowledge, also related concepts such as belief and justified belief, rational belief, evidence, concepts like this, okay? It comes from 2 ancient Greek terms, episteme, one ancient Greek term for knowledge, and logos, which can mean a lot of things. You see it at the you see it, or really it's the root behind the ending you see in words in English like biology, zoology, anthropology, sociology, psychology, so forth and so on. That ending of those words comes from this Greek word logos, which could mean a lot of different things, right? Including like reasoning, discourse, all of that. Okay, so that's epistemology. Metaphysics, this term actually has a really complicated history and a disputed one. I'm not even going to get into that now. If you're curious, you could go read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on metaphysics. It's actually got a section on the history of the word, and it's changed over time. The meaning of metaphysics. It's a term whose meaning has shifted quite a bit over the centuries in philosophy. Today, the way philosophers, at least in the English-speaking world, use it, the way I use it, we're really talking here about the study of existence and being, both in a general sense and a specific sense. So we could talk about the meaning of existence and being in general, which honestly, a lot of folks who specialize in metaphysics, like I did in graduate school, a lot of us don't spend a lot of time on that because a lot of us are like, yeah, it's kind of airy, it's kind of like hard to, come up with a lot to say about that that's really, reliable and useful. So a lot of us spend a lot of time on the existence, the nature of specific things like space and time, free will, causation, laws of nature, numbers and other mathematical objects, right? And there can be overlap here with areas like philosophy of science and philosophy of math, and that's fine, right? So when we're talking about epistemological and metaphysical arguments against moral objectivism, what we're really talking about are arguments that are alleging that, for the epistemological side, that if moral objectivism were true, we really wouldn't be able to know what the objective moral truth is. Maybe we'd be able to catch a little bit of it, but definitely not enough, right? That if moral objectivism were true, we would be kind of cognitively, epistemically, you might say intellectually, like sealed off from it. Like we wouldn't be able to access it, right? It's like if somebody might argue like this. They might say, look, I don't believe in ghosts, right? And even if they were real, you really wouldn't be able to know anything about them, right? Like even if you were confident that they existed, you really wouldn't be able to know, like, what are they made out of? Where do they come from? Are there different kinds? What do they do? You really wouldn't be able to have any confidence in any particular judgments about them. Like maybe you might think that they exist, but you wouldn't be able to say anything more about it. It would be basically useless to you, right? Because you don't have proper access to them. You can't like study them scientifically, dot, 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 dot. Now, I know some people might say, well, I've got a religious tradition or spiritual tradition that would give me guidance on that. Okay, okay, I'm not trying to actually get into debate here about the existence of ghosts or religions or anything. I'm just trying to use this example to illustrate. Someone might say, well, I think I've got pretty good evidence against ghosts, right? But even if they're real, you wouldn't be able to really know anything about them, so it would be useless to kind of speculate about them. It would just be better to ignore it. The epistemological argument against moral objectivism, it's saying something similar. If there really were these, objective moral facts, these objective duties, these objective obligations, right? There are objective facts about actions, maybe other things being morally required, permitted, forbidden. You wouldn't have any proper access to them. You couldn't study them in any way, right? And so you really wouldn't be able to know anything about it. And so you wouldn't even know how to follow it. And it would be kind of pointless and useless at that point because ethics are supposed to follow, right? We could even go a little bit further with this. Like there's this old principle in ethics that a lot of philosophers accept, not quite all, but the principle is ought implies can. You can't have a duty to do something that it's impossible for you to do. So one way I like to explain this in class to students, and they think they pretty much all find it compelling, is it wouldn't make sense to say that I, Professor Wolf, have a duty to end world hunger and that I'm a bad guy if I don't, because that's utterly impossible. You might as well say I have a duty to jump to the moon. I mean, I can't do that. What kind of sense would it make to hold me responsible for not jumping to the moon or jumping over the moon, right? I mean, it's just utterly impossible for me. How could I have a duty to do that, right? And then you might think, well, if you couldn't even know how to do something, well, then you can't really do it, and presumably with ethics, we're not saying you have a duty to just stumble on the right thing accidentally or with the totally wrong intention, so yeah. You couldn't know what the right thing to do is. You couldn't know the reason to do it. You just wouldn't be able to do it. Then you might even think then almost like the objective morality would like crumble on itself, right? It wouldn't just be useless. If it's useless, it almost like can't exist by nature. Okay, I'm being kind of loose here now. If you don't follow absolutely everything I'm saying, it's all right. But that's like the epistemological objection. You wouldn't. It wouldn't be any use to you, okay? The metaphysical objection would be that there's something really kind of funny, there's something kind of weird about ethics in itself, at least if we take it objectively. There's something really weird about objective ethics, objective morality. We're using ethics and morality interchangeably, right? Again, our English word ethics comes from the Greek word ethike, meaning character. Our word morality comes from the Latin moralia, which was just an ancient translation of ethike. So really for us historically, they're the same word. Okay. Even if some people sometimes want to distinguish them for different reasons, which is fine. But the metaphysical argument would argue that there's just something really weird about the nature of ethics, objective ethics. So weird, we shouldn't believe in it. Let me put a little more flesh on these bones and tie these arguments together a little more. Let's go back to ghosts. So some people believe in ghosts and some people don't, right? And here's a way of arguing against ghosts. I'm gonna start with some. I already talked about some metaphysical arguments, but I'm gonna start with metaphysical arguments this time, and then lead to epistemological, right? So you might start a metaphysical argument against ghosts like this. You might start with a naturalistic outlook, a scientific outlook. You might say, look, we shouldn't really believe in stuff that we don't see in science. We shouldn't believe in things that science doesn't recognize and that we can't make sense of in terms of science. If we look at tables, yeah, we should believe in those. And we can make sense of them in terms of science, right? These tables are made out of molecules. Molecules are made out of atoms. Atoms, periodic table. Well, that's all science. That's all science, right? The table doesn't require us to go beyond science. It's completely within the realm of science. We could say the same thing about trees. We could say the same thing about mountains. We could say the same thing about planets. We could say the same thing about stars. We could say the same thing about galaxies. We could say the same thing about black holes. We should only believe in things that science recognizes or that we can make sense of entirely in terms of science. So if you open a physics book, a chemistry book, there may be no reference to Pepsi cans, to aluminum cans, right? But there's references to aluminum, so you can make sense of it, of the can in terms of science, and you can make sense of the cola in terms of science, right? So it doesn't have to be that you should only believe in something if you find like the name for that thing in the index of, a college textbook on physics, chemistry, biology, geology, meteorology, whatever. But you should only believe in kinds of things that either science talks about explicitly, or that you can make sense of entirely in terms of the kinds of things that science talks about explicitly, right? So that's kind of it's sort of a metaphysical argument. It's telling us like what exists, like what we should consider as existing. It's the kinds of things that science recognizes as existing, right? The science recognizes, science uses to explain things, right? That's how we should do this. And someone might go a little further and ask, well, why? Right? Well, why? And this is where we're going to go from the metaphysical to the epistemological, that we can go back to the metaphysical in a little bit too, right? So you might say, well, this is why we should trust science and only science, okay? Look at how remarkably successful science has been, especially modern science, right? Just look at modern medicine. Y'all, it's absolutely unbelievable how many medical conditions that we can treat today, even cure, which were completely untreatable, completely uncurable before the rise of modern science. It's utterly extraordinary. Really is. And I think you can make a good argument that the reason modern science is able to achieve this is because of the methods it's following, like how it is, like the way it weighs claims, the way it weighs evidence, what it's willing to accept or reject, right? Its knowledge claims, its beliefs, how it understands rationality and evidence, the methods of science, modern, medical science, right? This has produced all this great stuff. You could look at microwaves. You could look at airplanes. I mean, we've been to the moon multiple times, right? I mean, we've sent, I don't even know. We sent probes to, beyond Jupiter. I don't know how far have our probes gone. I think we, I don't even know. Have we sent anything to Pluto? I should have looked this up before I started the video. I think we got some pretty good pictures of Pluto from some probes. How close did they have to get? I don't know. How far did they go out? Anyhow. It's unbelievable how much stuff that modern science has been able to figure out. We were never able to figure out before. It's not like we couldn't figure out anything before modern science, but we figured out so much. And we make so many fewer mistakes, and our mistakes are a lot less colossal, arguably. How are we doing that? By the methods. What do I mean by the methods? It's like our approach to things, again, the way we're willing to test things. Not everything in science is experiments in the way we normally think about it. That's not true. But we do use a lot of experiments in science, and we're able to develop instruments to improve our observation, telescopes, microscopes, all this kind of stuff, right? All kinds of scanning devices in medicine. We're disciplined. We're disciplined about what we're willing to accept. We're not just going to accept something on gut. We're not, we're not just going to accept something that somebody told us. I mean, actually, testimony is important in science, but then you're going to trust other scientists, and there's vetting processes, in place, at least potentially, for all of this, right? It might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but there's really something to that. And how is this rooted? The idea might be, well, we're really focused on what we can see, and what we can smell and taste and hear and touch. We're rooted in the senses, the five senses, right? And maybe not everything in science that scientists have believed in, you can see directly with the naked eye. You might need a microscope, you might need a telescope. Sometimes actually scientists have been willing to believe in stuff even when they didn't have a microscope or a telescope for it, right? I think microscopes and telescopes both basically go back to like the early 1600s, thereabouts. I think thereabouts, right? It's about 400 years we've had these things. And, of course, the first ones we had were pretty weak, and then they got stronger. Galileo did not invent the telescope, but he greatly, he improved the powers of it pretty rapidly, multiple times. There have been times in science when scientists were willing to believe in stuff, still are, that they can't see, either directly with their eye or with telescopes or microscopes. They can't do that. An example is, when Copernicus and many other scientists about 400 years ago argued that the Earth is not the center of the cosmos, but that the Earth is going around the sun. They couldn't see that with their eye. Their eye actually might tell you the opposite. Or maybe actually, if you think about the eye, is kind of neutral on that. Because whether we're going around the sun or the sun's going around us, everything looks the same to us from here. So they didn't have a direct observation for that, and they didn't really have anything that that they could. It's not like they weren't able to. Well, let me just leave it there. Let me just leave it there, right? With Darwin, right? With evolution, natural selection, right? 1850s, I think, is when he started publishing. Origin of Species was around 1851 or something like that. I really should have looked up all dates before I started this, right? I mean, Darwin didn't see something evolve right before his eyes, and he didn't know what genes were. He had no idea of genetics, the underlying mechanism for this, biochemical mechanism for it. He didn't have a clue what that was. And there've been a lot of other examples, modern science. There are things today that we have scientists say, at least some scientists say they believe in, even though they can't see it with the naked eye and they don't have a telescope or a microscope that they could look through and just go, oh, there it is. Nonetheless, their judgments about these things are always strongly rooted in observation, right? And there were observations. They weren't quite this clean and neat and easy and direct, but there were observations to support Copernicus' hypothesis that the universe is not all revolving around the Earth, but the Earth is going around the sun. And actually, Galileo, when he learned about the telescope and improved it, he was able to use that to make some to help make some powerful arguments for the Copernican hypothesis, right? It wasn't like a clean like a simple observation, like one simple observation. It was just like, okay, we just see it like that. But he was able to say, but I'm seeing a lot of stuff that seems to really point that way pretty strongly, right? And Darwin, it's like, yeah, he didn't see evolution unfold right before his very eyes, but he had a lot of really good observations that seemed to strongly point in that direction. So the idea here is that, in science, we're not saying it has to be as simple as open your eye and, oh, there it is, now that it, or it's got to be, you can do that through a telescope or a microscope. It doesn't have to be that clean and neat and nice and tidy. But the idea is what we believe in, we want it to be really strongly rooted in observation and have some sense of how you could test it, at least logically, fairly, with some real success, right? It doesn't have to be an experiment in any classical sense. And you might just think that ethics, it's just too loosey-goosey, right? You just can't do that. Take debates on abortion, for example. You could have a person who's pro-life, pro-choice. Now, I know I'm not trying to say that there's only one way to develop each of these positions. There's a lot of complexity here. I'm going to oversimplify in the interest of time. But you could have two individuals, one's pro-life, one's pro-choice, pretty strongly. And then maybe somebody asks them, hey, have you all studied much about embryology? Like how babies are conceived and grow, gestate in their mother's wombs, right? Have you studied any of the science behind this? And maybe each of them says, you know what, I really haven't. Let's go do that. Let's go do that together. And so they do. They go take a class on that, and they learn a lot about it. We could imagine easily that maybe they each go into the course. I think it's pretty rare for people today to really try to test their own ideas in any kind of serious way. I mean, we just have so much confirmation bias, but maybe we imagine each of them going into the course and they each both really, really try to learn the stuff and not just run it all through confirmation bias, but be really, really open to learning new things, maybe even changing their minds. They really do that. But we can still imagine at the end of it, each remains pretty convinced of their own position. Or maybe they swap positions, right? Or one of them swaps, right? Actually, let's do it like this. They each remain in their convention, their positions, or they both swap. We could easily imagine either of those things happening. And actually, we can imagine a lot of other people taking the class, and some of those, wherever they start, they might keep their position, they might swap, over the course of the term. The point is this: it could be that when we start studying embryology, when we start studying conception and fetuses and how they develop, it could definitely lead us to change our views on abortion, one way or the other. It could, right? But not necessarily. Not necessarily. And it's not that every single doctor that studies embryology has the exact same position on abortion. And what you're seeing here is that, yeah, there's stuff you can look at. There is stuff you can look at, and it may inform your view to some extent. I mean, presumably it would, maybe even should. But all the embryology in the world is not enough to come close to completely settling the ethical issue of whether abortion is ever morally permitted, and if so, when? Always, only sometimes, why, right? How could science possibly settle that? Again, it can help, but definitively settle that? No. Right? No. And we could even be a little sophisticated here and recognize that, this, if am I trying to imply that, like, it's only good science if all scientists accept it? No. There's often disagreement in science, right? But this seems like a different kind of a thing. It really does. And, that's kind of marked by the fact that, medical schools, they teach you about the embryology, but they don't put questions on the exam about whether abortion's permitted or not. Okay, they don't do that. They don't do that. So you might think that this whole abortion issue then is just not properly scientific. It's just not properly scientific. We don't really have access to it like we have access to things in science, right? And you might think, well, then maybe we just shouldn't be messing around with this kind of stuff. Because if we don't really have proper access to it, it's kind of like ghosts. And this is where we go back to the metaphysics. You might just think values are really, really just kind of weird things. Like moral duties and obligations would be really weird kind of things. Like, go back to descriptive and normative accounts of reality. Descriptive accounts of reality, right? To figure out how common murder is, well, that we can figure out how to do. We just go get, we could go talk to police departments and, hospitals, morgues, things like this, first responders, whatever, ambulance, drivers, paramedics, all this kind of thing. People who get called in when bodies are found, we could just go talk to them, get statistics, have them keep track of stuff. And we can then figure out like how, with a little bit of investigation, from the police on, and medical practitioners on cause of death and all that, we can kind of figure out, kind of like using science, empirical methods, the senses, how many people are murdered every year. Like that we can do. But whether people should be murdered, shouldn't be murdered, how do we do that? What methods are we going to use? What methods are we going to use? Right? Do we have like telescopes, you know what I mean? Or microscopes? Can we fit this stuff in a periodic table? Like good actions involve, I don't know, gold atoms, and like evil actions involve chlorine atoms. I mean, come on. How would we fit these moral values into the periodic table? How could we use anything like scientific methods to work out what's right or wrong? How could we do that? It's not like we have, there's some kind of like chemical test for good bad. We can't do that. Science can't do that. All of its microscopes, all of its telescopes, all of its scanning devices, particle accelerators, all the wonderful, toys that, all the wonderful technology that science has given us. We can't use any of it to settle ethical questions, or else we'd already be doing it. You know what I mean? You can't. I know some people might think whatever AI tells them, but good grief. You can't do it. And then you might think, well, again, if it's kind of beyond the realm of science, and maybe we shouldn't believe in it. Maybe it's just not responsible, epistemically, epistemologically. Maybe it's not like those beliefs aren't justified or rational. In other words, they don't really make sense for us to believe. It's kind of like having, the belief, there's 47 different types of ghosts. Well, where'd you get that from? I don't know. It just seemed right. No. Okay. So even somebody wants to say they saw a ghost, and then some of us might want to challenge that, whatever. But even if we let that go, if they tell us, well, there's 47 different types of ghosts, and the top ghosts are like, I don't know, the whatever, the zirconia ghosts, and they like rubies, and the second ghosts are the garnet ghosts, and they like garnet. I mean, we're gonna be like, no, that's just all made up. You have no basis for that, no evidence. That's just coming from who knows where. And we might start to worry that that's the position we're in with ethics. And so again, this is epistemological, but go back to the metaphysical. We might say, well, yeah, we don't have access to ghosts if they're real, but if they were real, they'd be really kind of weird things. Really weird. Really, 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 really weird. Kind of spooky. I mean, not necessarily in a scary sense, but, like kind of like mystical, like weird, like, and that's just weird stuff. Let's just not believe in that stuff anymore. Let's just not believe in spooky stuff. Okay. And so we put all this together. We have a metaphysical argument and epistemological argument against objective morals. Cultural relativism is supposed to do maybe a bit better on this, because if cultural relativism is true, right, then to know what's right or wrong, all we'd have to do is consult the polls. And that would solve that epistemological problem. And I've actually heard cultural relativists, use this metaphysical epistemological argument against moral objectivism. And they say, look, we solved the epistemological problem. You want to know what's right or wrong? Just consult the polls. On our view, cultural relativism is all you got to do. Okay? And the metaphysical problem, well, it just all comes from like conventions and people's beliefs and desires and things like this. And we all believe in that. We all believe in psychology. We all believe things. We all believe we desire things. That's just psychology, sociology, anthropology. So we're good. So there it is. You don't have to view the epistemological and metaphysical arguments against moral objectivism as being made on behalf of cultural relativism, but you have had some cultural relativists that have done that. It could also be used by nihilists, non-cognitivists, okay? So what should we make of all this? So I want to put a bit of pressure on this. So one, it's not clear actually that the cultural relativist can make these kinds of arguments. As we saw in class, and I'll make a video on this, there's actually problems with cultural relativism, epistemological problems. How great does the majority have to be? 51, 52, 53%, There's also the problem of how do we individuate the cultures? What counts as a culture? Do the Kurds count as a culture? How many cultures do we have in the United States? Again, like if there's a very small group of people in the rainforest in Brazil, do they get to be their own culture and decide their own morals? Or are their morals dictated by other Brazilians who might not even know about them? They might not even interact really at all. There's a lot of hard questions about the cultures and what counts as a majority. So actually, there's some pretty serious epistemological problems with cultural relativism. Also, if we take cultural relativism, as I'm taking it to say, morals are really real, they're just relative, yeah, I think you're still stuck with the metaphysical problem, right? Like values are still really weird. You haven't really done away with that at all. You've said they come from beliefs and desires and this kind of like psychological and sociological phenomena. Yeah, fine, great, wonderful. But I mean, though, like, yes, there are cultures, but you're saying the cultures generate the duty, and the duty, like, that's still a pretty weird thing, metaphysically speaking, right? At least seems so far. If you bought the metaphysical argument against moral objectivism, I think you should think there's kind of a problem here too as well. So maybe then we're being pushed to nihilism or non-cognitivism. I don't think we want to go that far. So is there anything more we can say? Yeah, there is. There's actually quite a lot more we could say. So first of all, we could say this. Then maybe we just grab the bull by the horns and we just say, you know what? Values really are weird. They really are. So be it. So be it. Number one, maybe we do just believe in God or gods, maybe even souls. And maybe we do see moral values as a part of all that. And we just take that all on board. Why think science has to be, the only source of truth? The only source of truth, right? And actually, we will talk about this later this semester. There's actually a lot of scientists and philosophers, but also scientists who say science never really proves anything, and not only does it never prove anything 100% definitively, you can't really trust anything it says about reality at all. You could use it, for technology. You can use it to make predictions, but you shouldn't really think of it as a source of truth, period. You really shouldn't be believing the kinds of things its theories are telling you. And if we actually go that far, so we can't actually take the world to be the way science tells us it is. We can use the technology. It gives us the medicine. It gives us and those kind of things. We can use it to predict the weather, but we shouldn't think that things that it seems to say exist really exist. So if we can't do that with science and we can't do it with anything else, and we can't trust anything, I mean, or we could trust our eyes, I guess, to just tell us there's a thing in front of me, but that's as far as we can go. Like, I mean, that seems kind of rough. Some might say we just have to do that, but I think we could just start putting pressure on this idea. We could just start putting, and again, if you can't follow all these details, it's okay. It's okay. And for a lot of these things, yes, I'm skating over some complicated things pretty quickly because time. And also it's the intro class, right? We only have so much time to cover things, right? So let's just go back up a level, and where I think a lot of us are going to be, more comfortable. Where I'm more comfortable is this: why do we have to say that everything has to fit science? Everything? And there's a lot of different types of science too. And you might think a lot of things, not everything in science is kind of established to the same degree of confidence, right? What part of science then gets to be the arbiter? Do we have to even throw out a lot of science? Or is it even the weakest part of science gets to count? The weakest part of science might be pretty weak, right? I mean, again, there's this interpretation of quantum mechanics according to which every time there's this thing called the collapse of the wave function, different universes get spun out. Basically, it believes in a kind of a multiverse, that there are different verses, different universes, different cosmoi out there. Well, how do you know they're really there? Can you see them with a telescope? No. Can you see them with a microscope? No. You might. How are you arguing for that? Well, we're trusting certain patterns of logic, some kind of root in observation, but arguably pretty tenuous, pretty weak. Is that okay? So now if we have science that's willing, we have some scientists at least that are willing to believe in whole universes that we can't even see, where there might be real Spider-Man or something like that. Is it really so bad to believe in something like God at this point? Some would say yes, some would say no. Okay. We can't get too into the weeds with this, but just, I think we could put, so here's like, I already gave some responses that these arguments are not going to help the cultural relativists as much as they might think. But to move beyond that, we might actually argue for supernaturalism, where it's justified, it's rational, it's reasonable to believe in some stuff that science doesn't recognize. That's number one. Number two, we might say, that actually science is pretty weird. a couple hundred years ago, there were some scientists, mechanists, who really only talked about matter. But we don't just. But then some people even noted, well, what do you make of forces? And then there's debate about forces. But it's in physics. It seems we've got a lot of weird stuff today. We've got matter, energy, dark energy, forces. All kinds of weird stuff in physics. And the more and more we go on in physics, the more weird, the world seems to be, the more weird stuff we come up with. Are you really sure that values are just too damn weird to fit into reality? That's number two, that science might be pretty weird. So again, objection one is maybe we're not just bound by science. We could be supernaturalists. We could go for some stuff beyond nature, beyond science. Two is just science itself might actually be pretty darn weird. Three, this is kind of related to two, but different. I'd argue that science is still pretty metaphysical, right? We'll talk about this a little bit later this term, but things like laws of nature, causation, even space and time. There's a lot of weird, wild, wacky metaphysical stuff in science, at least it seems. And you could try to get around that. You could try to say these things aren't as weird as they seem, or science doesn't really need them. But there's also some good arguments to be made that no, science actually really does need some of these things, and they're kind of weird. So I'm going to treat that as a third point, separate from the second. The second was, nature is pretty weird, and not necessarily in a metaphysical sense, just that scientists are claiming to discover, a lot of things, potentially discover things in science that are weird. But third, it seems like we just have a lot of metaphysics and science, arguably. And here's another response we could make. And if the distinction between 2 and 3 isn't totally clear, don't sweat it. Here's another argument we can make, a fourth argument, or fourth objection to the metaphysical and epistemological arguments against moral objectivism, is naturalists need values too. And if you want to do science, you need values. What kind of values? Well, first, you could get into issues of the ethical uses of science, right? The values are going to come up all over science. I mean, first of all, truth is a value. Truth is a value. Rationality is a value. Right? If a scientist says, I believe in astronomy, but not in astrology, they're already telling you this is all driven by values. Value of truth. I want to believe what's true, not just what's interesting or comforting, right? That's a value. Value justified belief. I care about my beliefs being, based on good evidence, based on good reasons. Truth and rationality, these are values. There's no test tube that can tell you that you should care about truth and rationality over comfort. The periodic table can't tell you that. No test tube can tell you that. No telescope can tell you that. No microscope can tell you that. No particle accelerator can tell you that. CAT scan can't tell you that. This is all driven by values. And then if you're going to go on to say that we don't want plagiarism in science, and we don't want people just making up results in science, that's all values, and it actually ties into moral values pretty easily and quickly. You cannot escape values. The only way you can really do this is to say that nothing really matters at all and go full-blown nihilist and say it doesn't matter what you do or what you believe, and that would mean that if you want to burn all science to the ground and just promote all pseudoscience all day long, go for it, go nuts. Who cares? I won't try to stop you. It doesn't matter. You do you on everything, even this. I mean, that's crazy. Do you think Neil deGrasse Tyson's going to want to go along with that? No way. We just can't get away from the reasons. We can't get away from reasons. We can't get away from values. We can't get away from reasons. We are always asking, maybe not always, but a lot of times we do want to know, why do you believe that? Should I believe that? Why are you doing that? Should I do that? This is how we are. We just find ourselves committed to understanding ourselves and others in the world, to basing our beliefs and values, at least to some extent, on some kind of reason, some kind of evidence. That involves values. We can't get away from that. The fifth objection would be this. I gotta be honest. I think you could raise some concerns about the responses I've given so far. These 4 responses. I think at least some of them are going to be holed up at the end of the day. But this fifth objection, the final one, or fifth response, final one, yeah, you can raise some questions about it, but I think it's pretty powerful. And here it goes. We could live without believing in ghosts. We can't have a society if we don't agree that we shouldn't torture and murder children for fun. There's some stuff, it's so basic. We can't really give up on it. We can't really question it. I think, yes, there can be value, and I know this might sound wild to some of you. I think there can be value in a philosophy classroom and asking ourselves, can we really be sure of that? Should we really be sure of that? That doesn't mean we need 100% proofs on it before we say, yeah, we need to follow this, right? If we don't let ourselves ask these kinds of questions, we'll have doubts in the back of our minds. I think a lot of bad things can happen from that. And we do need to question our gut instincts about ethics, because a lot of us have bad ones. Some of us have had these gut instincts that all left-handed people should just be killed. You know what I mean? People have had those instincts, right? So we can't just say, just because I have a gut instinct, I've got to trust it. No, you can subject it to some rational scrutiny, please. But it doesn't mean you need 100% proof to shore it up, right? To be justified in holding on to it. We can give good arguments for why we shouldn't torture and murder children. They're human beings. And then we can give arguments for the value of human beings, free will, consciousness, capacity to connect with other people, creativity, all that they feel pain. We could start exploring all kinds of arguments for the value of life, and then make all kinds of arguments that life is valuable. And so then it's good to help people and wrong to harm them unless there's a greater good that outweighs it, something like that. Okay? There's all kinds of arguments we could give. Then we can step back from all that and say, yeah, but can we prove that 100%? If we can't fit it in the periodic table, but you can't prove the periodic table 100%. What are you going to do? And you can only even ask these questions if you're already committed to trying to figure out the truth, which means you're already committed to values, right? But beyond all that, honestly, how could we not value the life of a 5-year-old? How could we not do that? I know we can get in some debates about abortion and stuff that's complicated, so I'm going to set that aside. How do we not value the life of a baby? How do we not do that? How do we not do that? We're really going to say it's okay to just torture and murder these things for fun, for entertainment, put it on pay-per-view? That's it. Again, if we do that, we've lost our minds. We've lost our humanity. We've plunged ourselves into evil. And if we do this in the name of logic and rationality and being serious intellectuals, I think that's just delusion and utter existential moral bankruptcy. Yes, it's good to ask, and it's good to step back and ask, how do we really know this stuff, ... But we got to be reasonable about how we do this. We got to be really careful how we do this. What I'm saying is this: I'm willing to trust, and I don't like to twist your arm too much, but I'll kind of do it a little bit here. I'm willing to trust we should help babies and care for them. We should help 5-year-olds, We should help 10-year-olds. I know once it gets beyond that, we start saying, well, I don't know. Do you like the same music I do? Do you vote like I do? ... Yikes. We all agree, don't we, that nobody should hurt a 5-year-old without good reason. If a doctor puts a shot in them or something that causes them some pain, okay, but it's a greater good. A dentist does something with their teeth that could cause them some pain, anxiety, okay, there's a greater good. We should not be hurting children for pleasure or for profit. We should not be doing this. We absolutely should not be doing this. That's a bedrock. And if the greatest philosopher on earth can show me that the arguments I can give for that are not 100%, I'm still going to follow it. And if they say, well, is it just kind of a perception, kind of an intuition, a gut? Not just that, I got my arguments. But if they say, but your arguments aren't 100% and gut sometimes go wrong, I'm sorry. I'm not going to do those things to those kids. I'm going to try and help them. And I can come back to that person and say, you can't even prove 100% that the logic you're using right now, is right. So maybe at some point, y'all, we just have to have something we're going to stand on. I would say trying to help people and not hurt them. It's a pretty good place to start. So at the end of the day, when I'm saying, I guess what's the nature of the objection? We don't need to satisfy 100% standard, and we don't have to satisfy the standard of test tubes in the periodic table, and that stuff's not 100% either. All right. What do you think? Actually, just last couple of words on this. Some of these videos are kind of long. Am I expecting you to write all this out? No. Am I expecting you to write pages and pages for all this? No. What I want you to write for this, I mean, write a paragraph. Write a paragraph. Do summarizing, condense it. If you want to write more than that, that's great. But give me a paragraph, like 5-6 full sentences, right? But really try to think about it. And I think if you do, this is really important because, again, in our lives, there's a lot of stuff that's going to come up again and again: ethics, free will, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're often going to have some pretty good arguments for this stuff, but there's going to be some doubts about it, and we're going to have to figure out, what do we do? And are all these things on the same level? Some of us might see God, ethics, free will all in the same level. Others are going to see ethics and free will as being more robust than God, more secure than God. Some of us might wonder whether we can trust any of it, but I hope at least we get the ethics and the free will, and we'll see about God later in the term. All right, peace.